"This is only going to hurt a little bit," said the 4-year-old homeless girl to the wheelchair-bound millionaire, promising to make him walk after hitting him in the knee with a hatchet. Rate my story from 0 to 10, your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The deafening roar of traffic in the big city echoed through the busy avenues as the little 4-year-old girl hid behind the stacked cardboard boxes at the entrance of the grocery store. Her brown eyes shone with a determination that contrasted violently with her fragile appearance, malnourished to the point of looking only 2 years old. She watched the colorful fruits displayed on the stand as if they were unattainable treasures. The hunger that had been gnawing at her stomach for 3 days drove her forward, but her trembling little legs could barely support her. The torn and dirty clothes hung loosely on her thin body, and her tangled hair partially hid a face that already knew too much suffering. That's when she saw the perfect opportunity. A man in a golden electric wheelchair approached the fruit section, moving with surprising elegance despite his disability. Even sitting down, it was clear that he was someone special. Aristocratic features, an impeccable suit, the confident posture of someone used to being in charge. His 30 years were well preserved, and a natural beauty radiated from him like an inexplicable magnetism. The girl waited until he was distracted, talking to the vendor about the quality of the imported apples. Her small fingers stretched silently toward a banana hanging from the stand, almost within reach of her desperate hands. "Hungry?" The male voice made her freeze in place. She slowly turned her face, expecting to find anger or contempt, but his eyes contained something completely different. A genuine curiosity mixed with something she couldn't identify. "I wasn't stealing," she lied, her voice hoarse from crying too much in recent weeks. He watched the skeletal child in front of him for a few seconds, noticing how she was trying to hide her trembling hands behind her back. There was something in those big eyes that touched him in a strange way, awakening feelings that he had buried long ago. "What's your name?" The simple question caught her off guard. It had been so long since someone showed genuine interest in her that she had almost forgotten what it was like to be treated like a real person. "People call me a lot of things," she replied evasively, "but none of them are pretty." The millionaire felt a pang in his chest. He recognized that pain in her eyes. It was the same he saw in the mirror every day since the accident that had confined him to the wheelchair. He took 2 bananas from the stand and offered them to her. "Take them. It's not charity, it's a gift from one person to another." The girl hesitated, looking around as if expecting someone to appear and punish her for accepting kindness. When she finally reached out, he noticed the small scars on her fingers, marks that told stories of survival that no child should know. "Where do you live?" "Nowhere," she replied, voraciously biting into the fruit. "I sleep where I can. I eat where I can." The simple answer carried a weight that made his heart clench. He looked at the child eating desperately and made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. "Want to come with me? I have a big apartment, real food, a warm place to sleep." Her eyes widened with a mixture of hope and terror. She had learned the hard way that adults weren't always safe, but something in his voice was different. There was no falseness, just a deep sadness that echoed her own. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." He smiled for the first time in months, a melancholic smile that revealed as much as it hid. "Maybe because I recognize someone who has suffered enough, and maybe because I need company too." The girl finished eating the bananas and wiped her hands on her tattered shirt. She looked at the strange man in the golden wheelchair, weighing her limited options. The street had been cruel to her since she lost her parents, and with each passing day, her hope diminished a little more. "Do you promise you won't hurt me?" "I promise," he said with a seriousness that made her believe him. When they left the grocery store together, She walking slowly beside the wheelchair. Neither of them imagined that this casual encounter would unleash a series of events that would test the limits of love, trust, and the possibility of mutual healing. The big city continued its frantic dance around them, indifferent to the silent miracle that had just happened between two wounded souls who met at the exact moment they needed each other most. The penthouse apartment in the skyscraper was a world completely different from anything the girl had ever known. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the metropolis that stretched to the horizon, while Italian designer furniture and carefully selected artwork created an atmosphere of refined luxury. She stood in the entrance for several minutes, afraid to touch anything. Her bare, dirty feet contrasted sharply with the polished marble floor, and she felt like an intruder in a palace. "Come in, don't be afraid," he said, noticing her hesitation. "From now on, this is your home too." During the first few weeks, the adaptation was a delicate and full of discoveries process for both. He had turned one of the guest rooms into a special space for her, with a small bed, new toys, and clothes that finally fit her skinny body. She spent hours watching the movements of the city below from the window, as if contemplating a world to which she had never belonged. Her curiosity about his physical condition began subtly. During breakfast, as he skillfully maneuvered the wheelchair to serve himself, she asked seemingly innocent questions. "Do your legs hurt when you sleep?" "I don't feel anything in them," he replied patiently, not realizing where this curiosity was leading. "But they're there. How can they not feel anything?" The questions became more frequent and specific as the days passed. She watched his every move with almost scientific attention, noticing details that even doctors sometimes overlooked. There was something about the way he sometimes frowned when he changed position, as if a distant memory was trying to manifest itself through his damaged spinal cord. The apartment gradually transformed with her presence. The oppressive silence that dominated the rooms was replaced by the sound of small footsteps running through the hallways, timid laughter in front of the television, and the constant murmur of her one-sided conversations with the toys. During these early months, he discovered aspects of himself that he had forgotten. The responsibility of caring for someone so vulnerable awakened in him a tenderness that he thought was lost forever. He watched fascinated as she devoured each meal as if it were her last, as her eyes lit up at small gestures of affection, as she slept curled up even in the comfortable bed, still haunted by months of helplessness. But it was while rummaging through a drawer looking for paper to draw that she made the discovery that would change everything between them. Hidden in the back of an office drawer, she found old photographs of him playing sports, walking on the beach, running in a marathon. In every image, his legs worked perfectly. The initial shock gave way to deep confusion. Why was he lying about not being able to walk? Why was he pretending to be confined to that golden chair when the photographs proved that he had once walked normally? For days, she studied the images in secret, comparing the man in the photographs with the one who took care of her. The face was the same, only younger and visibly happier. In the photos, he smiled with a genuine joy that she had never seen in the apartment. The conclusion she reached with the particular logic of a 4-year-old child was simple. He was pretending not to be able to walk for some reason she didn't understand. But that could certainly be resolved. Maybe he had forgotten how to use his legs, or maybe he just needed a reminder, a stimulus for his body to work again. She then began to observe him even more closely, looking for signs that his legs could work, and that's when she noticed something that confirmed her suspicions. Sometimes, when he slept in the office armchair, his leg muscles contracted involuntarily, as if they were trying to remember old movements. The discovery filled her with a fierce hope. If he could move his legs even unconsciously, it meant they worked. It meant he could go back to being like the happy man in the photographs. And she would be responsible for returning that joy to him. That's how she began to elaborate her secret plan. She researched children's books about the human body, watched medical shows on television, and came to the conclusion that he needed a shock, a scare that would make his brain remember how to command his legs. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to her, problems were beginning to form outside that luxurious apartment. The social worker responsible for the district had received an anonymous complaint about a single man caring for a child without proper legal documentation. Preliminary investigations revealed that there was no adoption process in progress, nor any formalized temporary guardianship. At the same time, his stepmother, an ambitious woman who had married his father only 2 years before the patriarch's passing, began to spread rumors about his mental instability. She argued that a paralyzed man living in isolation for years could not be psychologically fit to properly care for a traumatized child. The combination of these factors created a perfect storm that slowly approached the apartment where 2 wounded souls had found an unexpected cure in each other. While the girl secretly planned to cure his legs, external forces conspired to separate them just when they needed each other most. The tension increased with each passing day, creating a heavy atmosphere that not even her innocence could completely dissipate. He began to notice subtle changes in the child's behavior, the way she watched him when she thought he wasn't looking, how her questions about his legs became more insistent, how she started playing near him when he dozed in the armchair. What neither of them knew was that time was running out, and that very soon they would be forced to face painful truths that could either heal them completely or destroy forever the special bond they had built. The rainy autumn afternoon arrived with a melancholy that seemed to mirror the growing emotional tension in the apartment. Thick raindrops beat against the panoramic windows as he worked in his office, reviewing contracts involving millions in investments and financial applications. His fortune, built through stock market shares and diversified in bitcoins and other assets, allowed him this luxurious lifestyle, but at that moment all his wealth seemed insignificant in the face of the emotional complexity that his life had taken on. The girl played silently on the Persian rug next to his desk, but he noticed how she watched him with that peculiar intensity that had become her trademark. During the last few weeks, this constant surveillance had intensified in a way that was starting to make him uncomfortable. The accumulated fatigue from the last months of adaptation finally overcame him. He leaned back in the Italian leather armchair and closed his eyes, allowing the sound of the rain to lull him into an involuntary nap. His muscles relaxed completely, his hands falling loosely over the arms of the chair. It was in this moment of vulnerability that she decided to put her plan into action. She had found a small toy hammer in one of the drawers, part of a children's toolkit that he had bought to stimulate her motor coordination. To her 4-year-old mind, that object represented the key to freeing his legs from whatever blockage kept them immobile. She approached him with silent steps, her heart beating fast with nervousness and expectation. In her head, she imagined a magical moment when he would open his eyes and stand up, finally free to run and play with her like the man in the photographs. "It's going to be okay," she whispered affectionately, raising the small hammer. "I'm going to help you remember how to walk." The light impact on his knee was enough to wake him abruptly, but the effect was completely opposite to what she expected. The unexpected contact on his leg triggered a cascade of traumatic memories that he had struggled to suppress for years. Suddenly, he was back to that fateful night 5 years before, when his ex-fiancée had sabotaged his sports car in an act of irrational jealousy. The sensation of the impact, the sound of metal shattering, the excruciating pain that preceded the darkness, it all came back with an overwhelming intensity. "No!" he shouted, waking up in absolute panic, his eyes wide with terror as his body convulsed in the armchair. The violent and unexpected reaction terrified the girl, who dropped the toy hammer and recoiled quickly, her eyes filling with tears of confusion and fear. She had never seen him like this, out of control, haunted by ghosts she couldn't understand. "I just wanted to help you," she sobbed, trembling with fright. "I just wanted you to walk again, like in the pictures." Her confession hit him like a second impact. He realized then that she had discovered his old photographs, that she had formed childish theories about his condition, that all this time she had believed he was faking his paralysis. Guilt consumed him instantly. How had he allowed an innocent child to carry this impossible responsibility? "You don't understand," he said, his voice hoarse, still fighting against the traumatic memories. "I can't walk. It's not pretend. It's not laziness. My spine was damaged and—" But she had already retreated to the farthest corner of the office, curled up like a wounded animal. His reaction had awakened in her memories of other adults who had screamed, other moments when she had been violently rejected when she tried to help or get close. From that day on, silence took over the apartment like a toxic cloud. The girl stopped asking questions about his legs, stopped playing near him, and even stopped eating properly. She returned to behaviors he thought she had overcome, wetting the bed at night, having constant nightmares, and speaking only in whispers when absolutely necessary. He was consumed by guilt and self-recrimination. How could a man who had built a financial empire through calculated and strategic decisions fail so miserably in dealing with a child's feelings? His wealth, his stocks, his investments, none of it mattered if he couldn't protect the one person who truly needed him. The days dragged on in a heavy atmosphere of mutual hurt and misunderstanding. He tried to approach her with gentle gestures, preparing her favorite foods, buying new toys, trying to start conversations, but she remained distant, as if she had built an invisible wall around herself. It was during one of these painful weeks that the first official visit arrived at the apartment. The social worker, a strict middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, appeared unannounced to assess the child's living conditions. "I've received troubling reports of screaming coming from this apartment," she said, examining each room with clinical attention. "And also questions about the legality of this custody situation." He tried to explain that the screaming had been an isolated misunderstanding, but the evidence was right before the social worker's eyes. A visibly traumatized child who hid behind furniture and refused to make eye contact with adults. "The girl needs emotional stability and a structured environment," the social worker continued. "A single man, even with abundant financial resources, may not be the best option for a child with this history of trauma." The words were like daggers to his heart. He knew she was just doing her job, protecting a vulnerable child, but the possibility of losing the girl, especially now when she most needed healing and stability, was unbearable. At the same time, his stepmother intensified her quiet campaign to prove his incompetence. She spread rumors among their acquaintances about how a paralyzed man who had lived in isolation for years couldn't possibly have the proper psychological condition to raise a child. Her arguments found an echo among some distant family members who had always doubted his ability to emotionally recover after the accident. The storm gathering around them seemed to be converging toward an inevitable breaking point. Inside the apartment, two wounded souls struggled with misunderstandings that threatened to destroy the healing bond they had built. Outside, social and family forces conspired to separate them just when they needed each other most. The girl continued to isolate herself, whispering words of self-blame that he could only hear in fragments. "I hurt him. I'm bad. Everyone leaves." Each word was a blade that cut deeper into his already torn soul. The turning point that would change everything began quietly on a Sunday morning, when the dedicated nurse who had been caring for him for 3 years made an observation she had kept to herself for months. She had been a silent witness to intimate moments. when he slept deeply, when he was completely relaxed, when his conscious mind didn't control every muscle in his body. "I need to tell you something," she said hesitantly, organizing the morning medications. During all these years, I've seen things, small movements in your toes when you sleep, muscle contractions that shouldn't exist if your paralysis were complete." Her words echoed in the office like distant thunder. He had spent 5 years accepting the medical diagnosis of permanent paralysis, building his entire identity around this limitation, and now she was suggesting that perhaps something more complex was happening. "Are you saying I'm saying that maybe your paralysis isn't just physical," she interrupted gently. "Psychological trauma can create neurological blockages that mimic permanent physical damage. I've seen cases like this during my career." As he processed this devastating revelation, the girl continued in her self-imposed isolation. She had started talking to her worn-out rag doll, the only possession she had brought from the streets, venting fears and guilt she couldn't express to adults. "I broke him," she whispered to the doll during the lonely afternoons. "He was getting better, getting happier, and I broke everything. Now he's going to send me away, like everyone else does." These desperate confessions were accidentally overheard by him as he passed through the hallway. The raw pain in her voice made him understand the depth of the misunderstanding that had settled between them. She not only thought she had hurt his legs, she believed she had destroyed any possibility of future happiness for both of them. It was at this critical moment that he made a brave decision. He secretly called a physical therapist specializing in neurological trauma and explained both his physical condition and the complex emotional situation they were facing. "Based on what you've described," the therapist said after a long phone consultation, "there's a real possibility that psychological components are maintaining your paralysis. The trauma of the accident may have created neural blockages that prevent communication between your brain and your legs, even if the physical structure is partially intact." Hope and terror fought in his chest. If there was a chance, however slim, of regaining some mobility, it would mean that all these years of acceptance and adaptation might have been unnecessary. More importantly, it would mean that the girl's desperate intuition could have a real basis. At the same time, the social worker's investigations revealed information that completely changed her perspective on the situation. She discovered that his stepmother had forged medical documents to try to prove his mental incompetence, and that there was a pattern of previous attempts to question his legal capacity to manage his own fortune. Even more shocking was the discovery that his ex-fiancée, the woman responsible for sabotaging his car and causing the accident, was serving a sentence in a distant penitentiary for attempted murder. Investigators had found evidence that she had meticulously planned the accident, hoping he wouldn't survive to tell the truth. These revelations reached him through official calls that left him stunned. For years he had carried not only the physical pain, but also a subconscious guilt, as if he had somehow deserved what had happened. Knowing that he had been the victim of a deliberate murder attempt out of jealousy fundamentally changed his perception of everything he had lived through since. The social worker, armed with this information, began to see the domestic situation in a completely different light. A man who had survived an attempted murder and single-handedly built a multi-million-dollar fortune obviously possessed extraordinary emotional strength and resilience. "I withdraw my previous concerns," she admitted during a second visit. "It's clear that you are not only capable of caring for this child, but that you both benefit mutually from this arrangement." It was during one of the first experimental physical therapy sessions, held discreetly in the apartment, that the miracle began to manifest. The therapist had suggested visualization exercises combined with gentle physical stimuli, trying to recreate neural connections that the trauma had interrupted. The girl, curious despite her sadness, watched from a distance. When she saw his efforts to try to move his legs, something in her expression changed. Guilt began to give way to a hopeful fascination. "Can I help?" she asked shyly, breaking weeks of near-total silence. "How do you want to help?" he replied gently, his heart filling with relief at hearing her voice again. "Can I sing?" she whispered. "I know a song that always made me feel better when things were bad on the street." The song she began to hum was a simple melody she had learned from other homeless people, a song about hope and resilience that passed through generations of marginalized people. Her small, sweet voice filled the apartment with an emotional purity that touched something deep in his soul. It was during that first song, as she sang about not giving up even when all seemed lost, that he felt something extraordinary happen. An almost imperceptible sensation ran down his right leg, not pain, not tingling, but something like a distant memory of movement. "Keep singing," he asked, concentrating intensely on the sensation. She sang louder, more confidently, and for the first time since the hammer incident, her eyes shone with something other than fear and guilt. She was genuinely contributing to something positive, helping in a way that really mattered. And then it happened. His right foot moved, just a few inches, almost imperceptible, but a voluntary and conscious movement that broke 5 years of absolute paralysis. The silence that followed was filled with pure emotion. She stopped singing, her eyes wide with astonishment and joy. He looked at his own foot as if he were seeing a miracle, tears silently streaming down his face. "Did I really help you?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "You saved me," he replied, holding out his arms to her. For the first time since the painful misunderstanding, she ran into his arms and they both cried together, not from sadness, but from relief and renewed possibility. The healing they had found in each other had finally manifested tangibly, proving that unconditional love could truly break barriers that no medical treatment had been able to penetrate. If you liked this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.